We are back with David Kim. Now, David, no discussion of California's 34th district would be complete without a conversation or two about housing. As you discussed earlier, the average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in your district is over about $2,000, while the median income for a family of four is only about $37,000. This is clearly unacceptable, and the growth in homelessness is evidence that living and existing and working in that district is not only difficult, but for some families and for some people, it can be damn near impossible. Considering the decades of housing discrimination, redlining, and a lack of affordable housing, what will you do as congressman to not only address the current housing crisis in the 34th district, but to rectify the long tail of housing inequality and racism against Black, Latino, Asian, and immigrant communities?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. In regards to, I believe we have these very strong, bold, progressive campaign issues like Medicare for All, Green New Deal, that really aim to stamp out injustices and to uh, bring freedom in those different areas. So for with Green New Deal, for example, it's not just about the environment. It's also about the social injustice. It's about giving our underprivileged and marginalized communities also a chance to have a job with a living wage and to be able to support them in that. And I think now the next bold policy and platform is a homes guarantee. And so we have the homes guarantee. It was started by the People's Action, and by Tara. I forgot her last name. Tara Ragavir. I think I didn't say it correctly, but Tara. She's a leader on that, and she's in Kansas. And it's a bold program and policy where it's talking about how we have 40 plus million renting households, and about half of them, 50% of them, are rent burdened. They pay more than a third of their income on rent. We have 12 million of the 40 plus million paying more than half of their income on rent. And so when you look at this, you kind of think, whoa, if this is now, what would you think of it in 5 years, 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Because based on the past 30 years, our wages don't increase, but then everything else increases. So then we're even going to be in a system and society where everything's even more unequal. And to prevent that from happening, I think one of the very most important things is to attack it at the core, which is rent. Rent is what keeps us like bounded. I mean, obviously, it's something that also gives us the power and ability to be free in our own living space. I'm looking at my apartment, be free in our own living space and have that habitat and community. But it's also in a way that keeps you from progressing further, especially if that price isn't something that's warranted given the conditions and all the other factors that are in play. But unfortunately, we're in a time and period where even the bargaining leverage power between the tenant and the landlord is like this, where the landlord's up here, and it's so easy to go ahead and just barely qualify and fulfill the minimum requirements that a landlord has to do. But then once the tenant is unable to pay rent, all of a sudden in 3 days they have to move out. And so I think just kind of those things, and there's no system or padding to help cushion against that.
Mm-hmm.
Like in our communities, like it should make sense that every community has a right to counsel in terms of, because they can't afford to pay money to buy an expensive eviction attorney and to stall out being pushed out onto the streets and having nowhere to go. And I think it's very important for our government to be able to provide that as an extra right to counsel for those who aren't able to hire attorneys to defend themselves. So I think in different ways, whether it be like with and so this homes guarantee, it sort of divides it into different categories, Rainier,
Mm-hmm.
where we're talking about social housing units, where these social housing units, building at least 12 million of them. And why the number 12 million? Because we have 12 million of the 40 plus million renting households that are paying more than 50% of their income on rent. So building at least 12 million social housing units where it would be where there a separate fund would be created for building out those, and for those people moving in, they would be able to just pay up to a third of the income that they're making, and there would be a system where that balance would be made up in other ways, and then also incorporating with that permanent supportive housing for our current unhoused brothers and sisters who need more support services, and providing that, and then they're able to pay that with their UBI. And then also reinvesting into public housing, because we do have, of those that are living in public housing, about two-thirds of them are at least people of color, but then we have about $70 billion in improvements that haven't been made and need to be made, and we're neglecting that. And that's racist, that we're not doing, not where we're not reinvesting into public housing. And let alone with Los Angeles, we have less than 10,000 public housing units, as opposed to the nearly 200,000 in other cities around the country. And there's a reason to that, because we had an actual movement where these white supremacists had a movement in the 50s against public housing units in LA. And so that's why we don't have public housing in LA that much, as in comparison to other cities. And so that's why we have a housing crisis here, and nobody's doing anything about it. And it certainly doesn't help when your local politicians are taking money from real estate developers, where we have, I mean, if you just type in FBI Los Angeles, you'll see so many articles about how the FBI has been raiding into our local politics and to seeing what's being done. And so those are the kind of the different areas. Another thing with homes guarantee is removing exclusionary zoning policies, like what the YIMBY Act, Senate Bill 1999, I think, does as well, where it ends land speculation, increases multi-dwelling units in high dense areas, supports ADUs, supports modular homes. And I think that's all great, because we need to think outside of the box, use abandoned buildings, use land that would not customarily be used. But then I think we also need to go further. And it's not just, and this is where people ask, like, David, are you YIMBY? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a YIMBY FIMBY though, because I'm actually not that there's a progression, but I'm more in favor of YIMBY plus social housing on top, which is the 12 million social housing units that I've been talking about, because we really still need to fill in the gap. Because we don't want the UBI to then just go to these, I mean, to these expensive rents as well. And so we need to do something about that and set policies in place. And then the fourth category of the homes guarantee is having more rights for tenants. So establishing some sort of measure of rights for tenants on a national scale as well, not too burdening or restrictive, but just setting minimum standards, and allowing states to determine what those minimum standards are on their own. Just in the same way for police brutality, having minimum standards, because we actually don't have anything right now. And so, and then the last part is reparations, and this would be kind of tied in with what Marianne Williamson and other kind of presidential candidates or other candidates have talked about, in the sense of, we've had communities been shut out from conventional loan products, from being able to have the access to also purchase property. And so we need to provide these grants. We need to provide zero interest types programs where we're able to empower them to do it, or lower interest programs, because they've been shut out by the redlining and the deed restrictions and everything else. And we haven't actually done anything about all of those catastrophes that have happened in the past with seizure of land as well. And so I think it's now about time that we actually start doing something about it. And if we're going to really do this comprehensive surgery uplift with the people, also do it in housing, because that's the last sort of area that I feel needs attention. And so I think after Medicare for All, Green New Deal, UBI, the next thing is homes guarantee.
Wow. That is incredibly impressive. And I love that you have this fully fleshed out and really robust plan. Unfortunately, for whenever we have this talk of housing, a lot of people oftentimes completely ignore the concerns and the pain and the injustice of the homeless community, which is something that I know that you've talked about at length. Historically, given the issues of homelessness in your district, where NIMBYism is a part of the culture, where people don't want to even live near homeless communities or homeless shelters. This is obviously an economic and political issue, but there's also a cultural aspect to it. And especially you're making that mention of white supremacists being against affordable housing. So there's definitely a lot of racist history over there as well. If elected, how would you alleviate homelessness? And in your opinion, what changes could we make as a culture to help destigmatize and humanize homeless people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in regards to, we definitely, with this homes guarantee, about 600,000 permanent supportive housing units would be built of the 12 million.
Hmm.
So it'd be really focused on providing wraparound services for our unhoused brothers and sisters because um, they need also care and help and attention, and for us to just completely neglect that and look at them as ghosts or zombies, I think that's very inhumane,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's the reason that we're supposed to be living, to be honest, on a deeper level, because we are all just one race, being humanity. And so I think the ways about doing it is, how do we immediately start doing it? If we can't pass this homes guarantee nationally as a plan, then we need to start doing that locally, on a local level. And so I know that there's great candidates like Nithya Raman, who's running for LA City Council, and she's a hardcore proponent and supporter of the Fimbia movement, and really building out housing. But I think it also just comes down to, what can we do with what we have now? Like, it doesn't make sense that we're spending $700,000 on one unit for a person so that they can be housed again. I don't think that's the way to go either. And so it's finding different ways, whether it be with modular homes that we can get now, or finding currently existing buildings where we can easily build out compartmentalized units in that sense and not rebuild everything from scratch. And I think that's the way to do it. But because we have developers paying politicians to build new stuff, it's like, that's not really helping in terms of the people that actually need more affordable housing right now. And so I think it's kind of really looking at things from a different angle, seeing what's really not working right now, and what ways we can really help the people. And so, in a sense of, like, it just doesn't, like, in this in the idea, like, and it's so sad that because 2 months have passed now, it's not as of a hot topic issue anymore. But when COVID-19 quarantine and the safer at home order had started, like, what about our unhoused brothers and sisters on the street? Like, you don't care about them now. You're putting them in these shelters where their beds are 5 6 feet apart and where they're just coughing, and it's like, that's not really kind of continue, like, caring for our people. And so, like, we need to be able to have leaders who are able to take maybe unpopular stances, and he could probably be super unpopular for doing it, but I think in the end, people will realize, oh, actually, he did it because he really cared for all people. So commandering hotels to provide the housing for our unhoused brothers and sisters during these times, and having the
Hmm.
city help subsidize and pay for that. Like why not? And so, like, even with our federal government, if you're giving out these $4 million, $5 million, $10 million grants to, like, the community block development program and whatnot, then why don't you also create a separate fund that these local municipalities and state governments and cities can tap into, in order to allow them to commandeer hotels to house the unhoused brothers and sisters? And so I think there's a lot of disconnect between local, state, and national politics as well. And so, it's just interesting and funny to see how, like, as a governing, like, I don't know what the phrase or the idiom is, but, like, but your left hand's supposed to know what your right hand's doing, but it doesn't seem like that's the case right now with our government.
Hmm.
And I think if there was definitely better coordination in that, and how do we go about doing that? And so those are kind of deeper questions that we really need to take. And I think, like, the policy issues are great to be talking about, and it's great. But then I also think on a more structural, deeper level of, what does a government really look like, and are we doing that right now? I think that's also another kind of second important topic to really talk about, and to really care about during this election and campaign season, because that focus is completely not there. So, of being on the people.